There exists a creature similar to the Skinwalker or Wendigo that is not either of those monsters, but something uniquely disturbing. Whatever it truly is appears to haunt the lands of the Four Corners region, and it likes to find people to stalk for months at a time, some who disappear forever. A viewer by the name of Visibond24 sent me this story titled, "It Can Only Be the Fleshgate," which tells of his terrifying encounter with something that may be even the Navajo's worst fear. I haul livestock for a living. Cattle mostly, sometimes horses. I run this independent operation out of New Mexico, which means I own my own rig, and I've been on contracts, and I spend more nights sleeping in my cab than I do in my own apartment. If it's not obvious to you, this is not the life I planned for myself. But it is the life I've got, and after 11 years I've kind of made a peace with it. The route that changed everything came to me in March of last year. A logistics company I'd been trying to get on with for 2 years had a contract hauling beef cattle between ranches and auction houses across the Four Corners region: Arizona, New Mexico, a little bit of Utah, and Colorado. Territory where you drive for hours without seeing another vehicle, where your cell signal dies and doesn't come back, and where the land looks the same in almost every direction, until you start to feel like you're not moving at all. The runs were long but not unreasonable, and the company had a reputation for treating their independent haulers fairly. Judging by how much they offered to pay, that reputation turned out to be true. When the dispatcher called and offered me the route, I said yes before she finished talking. She told me the prior driver had quit, just like that, mid-contract, no notice. He walked away from a rig worth $90,000 and a route that paid better than anything else in that region. She said he refused to explain why, said he would not return their calls. I asked if something had happened, maybe some kind of accident, or perhaps some drama with one of the ranches. She thought for a moment, then came back with a no. There was nothing like that. She said sometimes guys just burned out. The isolation got to them. It happens. I didn't push it then. I needed the work, and that sounded like a good explanation to me. The first run was a Monday. I picked up 32 head of Angus from a ranch on the Arizona side of the reservation and hauled them southwest toward a feedlot a few hours away. This was a typical route, which I'd done 100 times before on other contracts. Nothing special about it. 8 hours of driving, broken up by mandatory rest stops, an overnight layover at a ranch along the way to let the animals rest in water, then another 4 hours to the destination. The loading went without a hitch. The cattle were calm, which isn't always the case in this business. Some herds spook easy, especially if they've been handled rough or if there's weather coming. But these were good animals. They were well managed, and they walked up the ramp into the trailer without much of a fuss. I checked my water tanks, checked the ventilation, did my walk around, then I pulled out before noon. The drive was so quiet. I listened to the radio until the stations faded to static. Then I drove in silence for a long while. The land out there helps to empty your head. You see just red rock and scrub brush and sky so big, it makes you feel like you're at the bottom of something, instead of on top of it. To be honest, I've always liked that feeling. Some guys hate the isolation, but I've never minded being alone. I made my first rest stop around 4 in the afternoon. Federal regulations say you have to give livestock a chance to rest and rehydrate every so often, so I pulled off at a wide spot in the road, got out, and walked back to check on the herd. They were fine. They were standing in loose groups the way cattle do. A few of them were drinking from the trough. I counted heads, to be sure, checked for injuries, and I made sure nobody was down. Everything was A-okay. But when I started walking back to the cab, I stopped. I'm not sure why. There wasn't anything to see. The desert around me stretched on in every direction, flat, dotted with juniper and sage, empty all the way to the horizon. There were no other vehicles or landmarks, nothing moving. I stood there for a few seconds, just looking. There was this feeling inside me, like I was forgetting something. I think we're all familiar with that feeling. It was like I left the stove on or missed an appointment. It became a nagging itch at the back of my skull. Something was wrong and I simply couldn't figure it out. I shook it off, telling myself if it was something that wrong, I would have remembered it. I got back in the truck. Later on, the overnight stop was at a ranch about 40 miles off the main highway. The rancher who owned the property was a guy who had been running cattle out there for decades. The company I drove for had an arrangement with them. Their haulers could use his property as a rest stop, water the animals, sleep in their cabs for the night. In exchange, the company paid him a monthly fee, and his hands would help with loading and unloading. I pulled in around 7. The sun was going down, a long, slow fade. The rancher wasn't around, but one of his hands met me at the gate, showing me where to park. He was a young, maybe 25-year-old guy, and didn't talk much. He helped me run the cattle into a holding pen where they could spread out for the night, then pointed toward a water spigot where I could refill my tanks in the morning. I asked him if the rancher would be around later. He said probably not. I asked if there was anything I should know about the area, any problems with the route or the prior driver. He looked at me for a moment, reminded me of someone trying to make a decision in their head, then shrugged and said he didn't know anything about that. I thanked him and he left. I ate dinner in my cab. Nothing beats a microwave burrito from a gas station, a bag of chips, bottle of water. I sat there for a long time, watching the last light bleed out of the sky. The cattle were quiet in their pen. I could see them through the windshield, dark shapes against a darker ground. Nothing moving much. I don't remember what time I fell asleep. I don't remember dreaming either. I woke up once during the night, and right away I couldn't tell what had pulled me out of my sleep. There was no alarm or loud noise that I recall, just I was suddenly conscious, and my heart was beating a little faster than it should. So I lay there in the dark, quietly, and I listened. The cattle were making noise. They weren't very loud, so they weren't panicked, but they did seem restless. They were shuffling about. There was a few low sounds, not quite mooing, more like the noise they make when something's bothering them, but even they may not be sure what it is. I sat up and looked through the windshield toward the pen. I couldn't see very much. There was no moon that night, or if there was, it was behind clouds, just the vague shapes of the cattle pressed together into a mass. They'd moved to the far side of the pen, all of them, packed real tight against the fence. I could see the dark bulk of them clustered there, facing away from the open desert, facing away from the dark. Wanting to know what they were up to, I watched for a while. The sound of them settled down after a few minutes, and whatever had bothered them seemed to pass. Coyotes probably, I said to myself. Maybe a mountain lion somewhere in the distance. Animals are real keen about predators sometimes, especially compared to humans. I told myself that was it. Likely just coyotes. I lay back down and stared at the ceiling of the cab for a while before I fell asleep again. In the morning, I got up with the sun and walked out to check on the herd. They were calm now, standing in normal, loose groups, drinking from the trough, acting like nothing had happened the night before. I counted heads. All 32 accounted for. I was walking back to the truck when I noticed marks had been left in the dirt. There was a patch of bare ground between the pen and where I'd parked. Dusty, flat, the kind that holds tracks real good. I'd walked across it the night before, and I could still see my boot prints from then, scuffed and unremarkable. But the remarkable part was what was next to them. Next to my tracks, maybe 10 feet from my driver's side door, there was something else. A drag mark, about 6 or 7 feet, like something heavy had been pulled across the ground, or like something had been crawling on its belly. I crouched down and looked at it. The edges were smooth, not the kind of mark an animal would leave. No paw prints around it either, no hoof prints. Just one long furrow in the dust, slightly curved. Whatever made it had been moving slowly from the looks of it. It ended about 3 feet from my truck, right around where I'd been sleeping. I lost track of time looking at it. Eventually, I stood up, finished my walk around, and got back on the road. I finished that first run without any other problems. I delivered the cattle to the feedlot and collected my paperwork. Then I drove back empty to pick up the next load. The drag mark in the dirt stayed with me for a few days, but I tried not to dwell on it. I mean, you can see some weird stuff in the desert if you're around it enough, including but not limited to strange animal behavior and tracks that don't make sense. Over the next few weeks, I settled into the route. There was a nice rhythm to the work. Pick up cattle at one of 4 or 5 ranches scattered across the reservation and the land around it. Haul them to feedlots or auction houses. Rest overnight at designated stops and do it all again. The money kept coming in, and I started to think the dispatcher had been right about the last driver. Some guys just don't handle isolation well. I got to know the regulars too. There was a ranch hand named Miguel, who worked at one of the loading sites on the Arizona side, and he was the guy you wanted on the other end of a cattle chute. He was very quiet and very efficient. He knew how to move animals without spooking them. We'd started loading before dawn most days, 4 or 4:30 in the morning, working by the lights mounted on the barn while the sky was still black. As I said, Miguel was quiet. He never said much, but I did notice he had a habit of watching the desert while he worked. He'd be guiding a steer up the ramp, and his eyes would drift out past the fence line, scanning the dark like he was expecting to see something. One time early on, I asked about it. He shrugged at me and said it was an old habit. His grandmother used to tell him not to turn his back on the open desert after dark. He said it like a joke, but he didn't laugh. There was a truck stop about an hour east of the reservation border, where I'd fill up between runs. The place was called Hal's, or at least that's what the sign said, though I never met any guy named Hal. The woman who ran the register was Navajo, and looked to be in her 70s, with gray hair pulled back tight, and a very kind-looking face. Her name was Dorothy, which seemed wrong somehow, too ordinary for someone who looked like she'd been there since before the highway existed. She was also quiet. Must have been the norm around here. But she would nod at me when I came in, and sometimes she'd ask how the drive was. I got the sense that she was asking about more than just traffic or weather. One night I mentioned the prior driver to her. I was paying for a diesel and a coffee, and I don't know why I brought it up. I guess I was trying to make conversation. I said I had taken over a route from a guy who quit suddenly, and I was curious if she knew anything about it. She then asked which route. I told her. She nodded slowly, like I'd confirmed something she already suspected. Then she handed me my change and said I should be careful driving at night. She said it flat, no emphasis anywhere. Very mundane-like. I waited for her to say more, but she just turned away and started to restock the cigarettes behind the counter. I left without another word. The other truckers on the CB were a mixed bag. Mostly guys like me, independents running livestock or freight across the empty parts of the state. A few of them had been working the area for years, and late at night, when the roads were dead and there was nothing to do but drive, sometimes you'd hear them chatting. There was a guy who called himself Nighthawk. I never met him in person, and I never saw his rig, but I heard his voice on the radio a few times a week. He had opinions about everything. Government cover-ups and secret military bases. He said things lived underground. I swear he was the kind of guy who'd blame a flat tire on a conspiracy. Mostly I just tuned him out. But one night he started talking about something that made me pay attention. He said that there was something out on the roads, something that had been around for a long time, but was getting bolder. He said the tribes knew about it, and had known about it for generations, but they wouldn't talk about it with outsiders. He said it wasn't a Skinwalker, and it wasn't a Wendigo. It wasn't any of the things white people like to name because they'd seen them in movies or on the internet. He said it was older than the names, and it was hungry. Then someone else on the channel told him to shut up, that he was going to scare the new guys. Nighthawk laughed and said the new guys should be scared. After that, I turned off the radio. Just another conspiracy nut trying to entertain himself on a long haul, I told myself. There was nothing out here but coyotes and empty road. Around run 6 is when I saw it. I was maybe 3 weeks into the contract. The route had become familiar by then, almost boring. I knew which stretches had cell service and which didn't, and where the potholes were, which rest stops had working bathrooms. That's an important thing to note. I'd stopped thinking about the drag mark in the dirt at all. I'd even stopped thinking about Miguel watching the desert or Dorothy telling me to be careful. It was late, around 11 at night. I was driving an empty trailer back from a delivery, taking a back road that cut through reservation land. The only light that night came from my headlights on the road. I came around a curve and something was on the side of the road. My headlights caught it for maybe 2 seconds, maybe less than that. It was pale. That's the first thing I registered. Pale like something that had never seen sunlight. White like a grub when you turn over a rock. It was low to the ground, close to the dirt, and for a split second, I thought it was a person who had been hit by a car. Someone crawling on their hands and knees in agony. Then it moved. And it didn't move like a person, nor any animal I'd ever seen. It shifted its weight and turned toward the light, and I saw the shape of it change in a way that didn't make sense, like all its joints were backwards. And then it was gone. Off the road, into the dark, so fast I couldn't track it anymore. I did not slow down at all. My foot stayed on the gas, and I kept my eyes on the road ahead. I drove for another 20 minutes before I realized my hands were all shaky. I told myself what I'd just seen was a sick, mangy coyote. That could explain the pale color, the strange way it moved. Coyotes with mange lose their fur and their skin can go gray or even white. They can look like something from a nightmare. I'd seen pictures of them. It made so much sense at the time. Except for the size. Mange doesn't make an animal bigger. And whatever I'd seen on the side of that road, curled low against the ground, had been big. At least the size of a fully grown man. Maybe bigger. I didn't plan on telling anyone just yet. The run right after that was much worse. I was hauling a full load, 28 head of cattle, from a ranch near the Utah border down to an auction house outside of Flagstaff. It was a 2-day trip with an overnight stop at the same ranch where I'd seen the drag mark. The weather was clear, the roads were good, and everything was routine. I was on a long, straight stretch of highway, about 2 hours from the overnight stop, when the cattle started screaming. Now, that's not the right word. Cattle don't scream. They bellow, they low, they make that deep groaning sound when they're stressed out. But this wasn't the same as that. It was a sound I'd never heard them make before in all my 11 years of hauling livestock. This was ragged and high-pitched, as if they were being actively torn apart. I pulled over as fast as I could and hit the hazards. I jumped out and ran back to the trailer. The whole rig was shaking. I could feel it through the ground. The vibration of 30,000 pounds of animal trying to get away from something. I got to the side of the trailer and looked through the ventilation slats. They were grouped against the far wall. All of them, crushing each other against the metal, climbing over each other, a mass of bodies pressed as far from the roadside of the trailer as they could go. Their eyes were rolling white and their mouths were open, making that sound. I looked at the roadside of the trailer. Nothing was there. Empty road, empty desert. Nothing. I stood there for a few minutes, waiting for my heart to calm down. The cattle eventually settled too. The screaming faded to heavy breathing and then to silence. After a good 10 minutes, they started to spread out again, still nervous looking, bunched tighter than normal, but no longer panicked. I walked around the trailer twice, checking every inch of it, checking the road in both directions. But I didn't find a single trace of what might have spooked them. It was just me and the cattle and the empty dark around us. I got back in the cab, and I sat there, taking deep breaths. Then the CB crackled. There was a voice I didn't recognize, faint and breaking up, but it came through well enough for me to hear it. "You okay there, driver? Saw you pulled over." I picked up the handset. Yeah, I'm fine. Cattle got spooked by something, not sure what." The static came back for a moment, and then I heard, "What mile marker are you at?" I told him. Then there was more static. When the voice came back, it was quieter. "Oh, that's a bad stretch. Don't stop there too long. Not longer than you have to, okay?" "What do you mean, bad stretch?" But the channel had gone dead. I tried raising him again, and I tried a few other channels too, but I got nothing more than static after that. I put the truck into gear, and I drove. I made it to the overnight ranch just before midnight. The rancher's hand was there to meet me. It was a different guy this time, an older guy. He helped me unload the cattle into the pen and did not ask why they were so skittish, why they practically ran down the ramp to get out of the trailer. That night it was difficult to fall asleep. I sat in my cab with the doors locked and the parking lights on, and I watched the desert until the sun came up. Nothing happened. The cattle stayed calm. The night passed by without incident. But in the morning, when I went to check on the herd, I found something. One of the steers had a mark on its side, a scrape about 4 inches long, right behind the shoulder. It wasn't deep and hadn't really broken the skin, but the hair was gone in a thin line like something had rubbed against it. Something with a rough surface. Perhaps something that could reach through the slats of the trailer while we were parked on that empty stretch of road. I loaded the cattle and got back on the highway, and I did not stop again until I reached the auction house. I started dreading the overnight stops. It wasn't something I admitted to myself right away. I just noticed that I was driving a little faster toward the end of each run, trying to shave off time, trying to make it to the next destination before I had to pull over and sleep. When that wasn't possible, I'd park under lights if there were any, or close to buildings, close to people. I tried to tell myself it was common sense, safer that way. After my last run, the dispatcher called me to say the client was happy with my work. I was giving them on-time deliveries, no losses, cattle arriving in good condition. She asked if I was settling into the route okay. I said yeah, everything was fine. She paused for a second, then said the prior driver had been good too, for a while. So, she said, if I ever needed to talk about anything, I could call her, anytime. I thanked her and hung up. And then I sat there in the truck stop parking lot, wondering what the heck that was supposed to mean. The next week, I stopped at Dorothy's place to fuel up. It was late afternoon. The sun was already getting low, and I had another 2 hours to drive before the overnight ranch. I filled the tanks, checked my tires, and went inside to pay. Dorothy was behind the counter like always. She rang me up without saying much, and I was about to leave when I stopped at the door. I'm not sure why I said it. I think I needed to tell someone. Maybe I thought she'd laugh and tell me I was being stupid, and that would be the end of it. I said I'd seen something on the road a few nights back. She didn't look up from the register. She asked what kind of something it was. I said that I wasn't sure. Maybe a person on the side of the road, out past mile marker 60-something. I said whoever it was looked really sick and pale. I said I didn't stop because something about the way they moved didn't sit right with me. Dorothy was now staring at me. Her face had changed. She was looking at me like I had told her someone had died, but she'd been expecting the news. She then asked if it saw me. I didn't know how to answer that. I told her I thought so, that it had turned toward my headlights. She did that slow nod again. Then she explained it was good I didn't stop. She said whatever I did, I should never stop for it. Ever. Not even if it looked like someone I knew. I waited for an explanation, but there was none. She didn't offer one. She handed me my receipt instead, then turned away. I asked her what it was. She was quiet for so long, I thought she hadn't heard me or didn't want to answer. I was about to leave when she said that it didn't have a name, or she didn't know if it did. She said her grandmother used to tell her stories about things men are not supposed to speak of, in places men fear to dwell. She said that such things were mostly gone now, or just sleeping, but not all of them. Some of them were still out there. She then said she had other customers to help, even though the store was empty. I took the hint and what information I could get, then left. The overnight stop that night was at a different ranch, one that I'd only used once before. A smaller operation, just a few hundred acres, run by an older couple who didn't ask questions. They had a pen set up near an old barn and a spigot for water, and that was about it. They didn't have any hands to help with unloading and no lights except what came from the house a few hundred yards away. I got the cattle settled around 8. By myself, it took a bit longer. I fed them, watered them, and checked for injuries. They were calm enough. No repeat of the screaming from before, thank God. But they still clustered together, tighter than they should have. I'd started to notice that. Every herd I hauled now did the same thing at night. They would be very tightly grouped, facing inward, like they were circling against something. I ate dinner in my cab and watched the dark come down. And around 10, I smelled something. It was faint at first. I thought maybe one of the cattle had gotten sick, or something had died nearby. It was a sour and sweet smell, like rotten meat. I got out and walked over to the pen, shining my flashlight through the rails. The cattle appeared to be fine, alive and standing, grouped up in the far corner of the pen like they were before. But one of them was making a strange sound, so low I could barely hear it. I'd never heard cattle hum before. I listened for a moment. The other cattle were silent. It was just that one, humming to itself, staring at the dark beyond the fence. And as it did, that smell grew stronger. I walked around the pen checking for carcasses or anything that might explain it, but I didn't see anything strange. I walked out past the fence line and into the scrub, sweeping my flashlight across the ground. No dead things, nothing rotting. All I found was dirt and rocks, but the smell kept building up. There was a thickness to it now, coating the back of my throat, almost enough to make me gag. So I stopped walking and stood very still. The wind was blowing right at me, coming from the desert and blowing towards the pen. So that meant it was coming from out there, whatever was making that smell. And whatever it was coming from, it was close enough to smell. I turned around and walked back to my truck quickly, but I didn't run, even though I desperately wanted to. I got in the cab and locked the doors, and I sat there with a pounding heart, watching the desert through the windshield like I had so many nights before. Eventually, that smell did fade. I think it took about an hour. And once it was gone, the cattle looked more comfortable, except that one steer never stopped humming. I tossed and turned, trying to sleep, but I don't think I did. In the morning, I found tracks around the pen. They weren't the same as before. These were footprints, barefoot and human-shaped, pressed deep into the dirt, like whoever had made them was heavy. They circled the pen 3 times, staying about 10 feet from the rails, and never coming any closer. Then they led off into the desert, and disappeared on the hard, packed ground. And the stride was insane. I'm 6 foot even, and I could not match that stride without having to jump. A few days later, I met the other trucker. I was at a rest stop near the state line, one of those big ones with a diner and showers and a few dozen parking spots for long-haul rigs. I'd stopped to eat and clean up, maybe talk to some other drivers, just to hear some human voices that weren't coming through a CB speaker. The diner was mostly empty at the time. There were a few guys at the counter and one family in a booth by the window. But that was it. I took a seat at the far end, ordering a coffee and a burger, and I didn't expect anyone to bother me. But this guy sat down across from me without even asking. He was an older man, maybe 60 years old. He was wearing a faded cap with a trucking company logo, one that I didn't recognize. He said he'd seen my rig in the lot, and he asked if I was the one running the livestock route through the reservation. I said yeah. He nodded slowly. Then he asked if I'd seen it yet. I didn't answer him right away. I looked him over first, trying to figure out if this was a joke, if someone had put him up to it. But he looked at me, patient and waiting. I said I wasn't sure what he was talking about. He smiled, but it wasn't one of those happy smiles. Then he said, yeah, I did. He said he could tell by the way I was sitting down here, and the way my eyes kept going to the windows. He said he'd seen the same look a few years back, when he first started to see it himself. I swallowed hard. So then I asked, what was it? He shook his head and said that he didn't know. He explained how he'd asked around, talked to locals and other drivers. Everyone thought it was something else. A Skinwalker, a Wendigo, something in Spanish that he couldn't remember. He said he didn't think any of the names were right. He said it was something older than the names. So then I asked, what did it want? He was quiet for a while. Then he said that he thought it was curious. He said it followed him for nearly a month, showing up at night, getting a little bit closer each time. He said it never attacked, never tried to get inside his truck. Whatever it was, it wanted to watch. I asked what happened after the month. He said, well, he quit the route, took a pay cut, and switched to a different territory. And he hadn't seen it ever since. I then had to know if he thought it would have done something eventually, if he'd stayed. He looked down then back up, and he said yes, he was sure of it, saying that toward the end of the encounters, he had started hearing sounds, strange clicking noises that sounded threatening and inhuman. He left before I could ask anything else, just up and left, like that was the end of some unspoken appointment. He did drop a few bills on the table for his coffee, but walked out right after that. I watched him as he crossed the parking lot and climbed into his rig and pulled away. After that, my appetite wasn't as big as it was before, so my food sat there getting cold. I was thinking about what he said. The ticking sounds. What would I do if I heard it? The worst run came a few weeks later. I almost didn't take the run. The dispatcher called with a last-minute job. 30 head of cattle that needed to move from a ranch on the Utah side down to a buyer near the border. Short notice, a tight deadline, but the pay was extra, and that made thinking it over much more easy than it should have been. From the start, though, the weather was bad. The sky had a yellow-brown tint to it, the kind you see before a dust storm, and it just makes the atmosphere feel sick. Thing is, I checked the forecast before I left, and it said clear. But forecasts don't mean much out here. I guess you could say the land makes its own weather. I picked up the cattle around noon. The rancher seemed eager to get them loaded, what with the sky looking more menacing by the second. I talked about whether he was expecting a storm, and he said maybe. It was hard to tell. But he said that I should probably get moving if I wanted to beat it, just in case. So I got moving. For the first 2 hours, everything was fine. The road was empty and the cattle were calm. The sky just stayed that ugly yellow, but nothing came of it so far. I was beginning to dare to think I'd make it to the overnight stop before anything hit. But then the wind picked up. It came in from the west, hard and sudden, rocking the trailer on its suspension. I could feel the rig wanting to drift away from me, and I had to correct the steering every few seconds to keep it straight. The dust started a few minutes later. It wasn't a wall of dust, not yet, just a haze that cut visibility down to maybe a quarter mile. The yellow sky turned brown, then gray, then something closer to black, even though it was barely 4 in the afternoon. I slowed down and put my lights on. I kept on driving. Stopping in the middle of the road seemed worse than just pushing through. The wall hit around 4:30. 1 second I could see the road ahead somewhat, faded and dim but visible. The next second, nothingness. Just dark brown. Dirt and grit slamming against the windshield hard enough to sound like hail. The whole truck shuddered in the gusts. I couldn't see the hood of my own rig. I couldn't see anything. So I had to pull over. There was no choice. The shoulder was dirt, and I could feel the tires sink a little as I eased off the pavement. But I got the truck stopped, and I put it in park, killing the engine and sitting there listening to the wind screaming. That dust storm would last 4 hours. I sat in my cab and waited. What else was there to do? The radio was nothing but static and my phone had no signal. It hadn't had signal out there for a good 50 miles. I couldn't see the cattle in the trailer behind me. I could see nothing but brown-gray nothingness pressing against the glass. I snacked on some crackers I had in the glove box and drank warm water from a bottle, and waited. Around 8:30, it died down. It wasn't all at once, but gradual. The wind dropping from a roar to a moan to something like a whisper. The dust thinned out enough that I could see shapes again. The road, then the desert, then the sky, still hazy and no stars. Finally, I got out and I checked on my cattle. They were alive, stressed out, and well dusted, but alive. None of them were down, none of them were injured. They'd literally weathered the storm. I counted heads twice to make sure. All 30 accounted for. I walked around the trailer then, checking the tires, the hitch, the lights. Everything looked okay. The rig was covered in dust too, but functional. I could get back on the road now, make it to the overnight stop in just a couple of hours. I got back in, and the truck wouldn't start. I turned the key and got nothing, not even a click. The battery was so dead, its soul had been snatched into the afterlife. Or perhaps it was the engine. Maybe the dust had gotten in there and fouled something that I couldn't see. I tried it several more times, knowing it wouldn't work, because that's just what humans do. But I was very clearly stuck, and with no cell signal, and with no radio. And I hadn't seen another vehicle on the road in God knows how long. The overnight ranch was still 40 miles away, much too far to walk, especially at night. especially with 30 head of cattle I couldn't just leave behind. I was gonna have to wait it out until morning. Wait and hope that someone might come along by then, or that the truck just decided to start. Maybe my phone would find some signal by then. I got cozy and locked the doors. The first hour was quiet. I watched the dark settle over the desert, watching the last of the dust haze fade into ordinary night. It was a very dark new moon night, blackness in every direction. Around 10, the cattle started to get restless. I heard them then, shuffling around, hooves on metal and bodies bumping against the trailer walls. Then those low sounds, not quite mooing. It reminded me more of that humming I'd heard before. It was one animal at first, then more of them. A chorus of low vibrations I could feel through the frame of the truck. I turned around and looked through the rear window of the cab. I couldn't see much, just the dark bulk of the trailer behind me. Some vague shapes of cattle moving inside. They were gathering against the far wall again, away from something. I sat very still and listened closely. The wind had died completely. The desert had gone absolutely silent. The blood in my ears was deafening. Then I heard something else. Footsteps circling the truck, something with weight to it that moved on 2 legs. I could hear it crunching the dirt and gravel outside, the slight drag between steps, a pause as it stopped and then started again. It was walking around me, taking its time. I didn't move. I tried not to breathe. I sat in the dark cab with my hands on the steering wheel, and I listened to it circling. Once, twice, 3 times. Each loop taking maybe 2 minutes. Moving slow enough, I could track its position by sound alone. On the 4th circuit, it stopped at the driver's side door. Then there was silence. I could feel it out there. I know it doesn't make sense, but I could feel it. A presence of something taking up space in the dark only a few feet away from me. The cattle had gone completely silent too. No more humming or moving. Even they were too afraid to shift at all. But then I heard breathing. It wasn't coming from me or the cattle. It was coming from outside the window, inches from the glass. These long, slow, moist breaths, like a dog sniffing the air put into slow motion. Sounded like it was tasting the air rather than smelling it. This went on for much too long of a time, several minutes, I think, and all the while I sat frozen, not daring to look toward the window. I stared straight ahead, and I listened to that breathing. Eventually, it moved on. I heard the footsteps again, continuing around the truck, past the hood, around to the passenger side, then back toward the trailer, then nothing. I waited. The cattle started to move and make noise again after maybe 20 minutes. It wasn't a panic, but more like stressed movement. Whatever had been out there, the cows now thought it was gone. But I didn't believe them. Around midnight, I heard it on the CB. I'd been trying the radio every half hour or so, just clicking through channels, hoping to catch another driver or a signal from somewhere. All I got was static, 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 and then, on channel 19, something that wasn't static. It was a voice, broken up, fading in and out, but a voice nonetheless. Of course, I assumed it was another trucker. The cadence was right, that slow drawl guys use when they're tired and just want to hear someone talk. But I couldn't make out the words. It was like listening to a baby trying to speak, but with a man's pitch. I picked up the handset. "This is a stranded driver on Route 160. Can anyone read me? I need assistance." The voice stopped. The channel went quiet, but then it came back, and this time it was clearer. When I heard it, my heart nearly gave out.
This is a stranded driver on Route 160.
I dropped the handset. The voice kept going, repeating parts of what I'd said, sometimes mixing them up. It was trying different combinations.
Stranded driver, need assistance. Can anyone stranded? Anyone read me, driver?
I turned the radio off. I sat in the dark and listened to the silence and waited for morning. Sometime around 3, I looked up to the windshield, just randomly, and I saw something. It was standing about 50 yards away, at the edge of where my parking lights could reach. Something tall and thin, standing on 2 legs, with a posture so horrible that it couldn't be human, and all the joints were bent backwards. It had that same grub-like white paleness to it that I'd seen on the roadside long ago. Something that had not only never seen the sun, but was also repulsed by it. And the skin looked wet. It glistened. It didn't move. It stood there, facing my truck, watching me. I couldn't see its face, but I didn't want to. For some amount of time, it stayed like that, with me in the cab and it in the dark, neither of us moving. I know it went on long enough that my eyes began to burn from not blinking. But I was scared to blink. I was scared to take my eyes off of it for even a moment, because if I lost sight of something like that, I would have lost it. But I was in for something worse. Because I kept watching it, I eventually saw it smile. I saw the movement from that distance, the lower part of its face practically splitting open, widening and going too far. Not a human smile at all. Not any kind of smile that belonged in the world of the living. It held that expression for a long time. Then it dropped down to all 4s in a single fluid motion and crawled. It was so fast. My very first thought when I saw that was that no man could outrun it if it crawled at them. I'd never been so thankful to be surrounded by metal and glass. It crawled away into the distance until I could no longer see it, and I stayed awake, not wanting to close my eyes for even a second. I watched for any movement. When the sun finally came up, the truck started on the first try. I made the delivery that morning. I drove those last 40 miles in a kind of daze, my hands on the wheel, eyes on the road, but my mind wasn't there. It was somewhere else. The cattle were fine, and the buyer was happy. I collected my paperwork and drove away, and I don't remember any of the rest of the drive. I do know that I called the dispatcher that afternoon and told her I was done, and she was not surprised. She asked if something had happened, and I said no, just time for a break for me. She said she understood, and that route particularly was hard on people, and she said if I ever wanted to come back, the work would be there. I said thanks, and I hung up. For about a week, I thought that was the end of it. I stayed in my apartment in town and didn't take any jobs, and I barely left my own building. I was like a kid again, but not in the happy way that phrase usually implies. No, I slept with my lights on and the TV still playing, and I told myself the boogeyman was not actually real. What a joke. But my money ran out, as it often does. That's the thing about being independent. No work means no pay, and no pay means the bills stack up quick. Truck payment, insurance, rent, food, all the things people gotta have. I'd been doing okay on the cattle route, putting some aside, but apparently not enough. After 10 days of nothing, I was looking at my accounts and doing math. Stressful math. I started calling around for other work. Different routes, easier cargo. There was a furniture company that needed a driver for a run to California. A construction outfit was looking for someone to haul equipment up to Colorado. I took what I could get. I was back to normal long hours and boring roads. Nothing in the dark, except my own headlights. I started to relax, started to think maybe I would never see anything like that again. After all, the other trucker, the one I'd met at the diner, he said that the incidents stopped once he changed routes, once he got away. But I was wrong. A couple weeks after I quit the cattle route, I was hauling a load of building materials up through the mountains. A late-night run with empty roads. I came around a bend, and my headlights caught something on the shoulder. Pale, low, gone before I could really process it. Just a deer, a coyote, anything, I told myself. But I knew what it was. I knew I'd been followed. A few nights later, I was parked at a rest stop near the state line, trying to sleep in my cab. I woke up around 2 a.m., that same sudden alertness from before. I looked out the windshield. It was standing at the far end of the parking lot, under a light that flickered every few seconds. Tall, motionless, and watching. I started the truck, and I drove until sunrise. After that, I saw it every few days. Never close, never approaching, but always there, it seemed. At the edge of a gas station lot or on an overpass as I drove under. Standing in a field beside the highway, visible for a split second. It was following me. It was following me, and the route didn't matter. I went back to Dorothy's place on a Tuesday afternoon. I wasn't even hauling anything. I wasn't supposed to be there. I got in my truck and drove until I was at Dorothy's. She was alone behind the counter when I walked in, and she watched me approach without saying a word. I told her I'd quit the route, and I asked, what does it want from me? Why was it following me? How do I make it stop? She came around the counter and sat down on one of the old chairs by the window, moving like her old bones hurt. She gestured for me to sit across from her. She explained she'd known people this had happened to before. Not many, a handful over the years, going back to when she was young. She said most of them left the area and never came back, and she didn't know what happened to them after that. She said a few had stayed, and eventually the sightings did stop, and they would live out their lives without ever seeing it again. So I wondered out loud, what made the difference? She shook her head. She said she wasn't sure. Her grandmother apparently had some theories, old stories about things that chose people for reasons nobody knew. Said that sometimes things like that just watched. Perhaps at one point they wanted something with an individual and eventually lost interest and moved on. With a gulp, I asked what had been on my mind. What happened to the ones who didn't get lucky? She said they disappeared. One by one, over months or years, they went out into the desert and simply did not come back. She said those that never came back would report hearing clicking sounds before their disappearance. Others reported hearing a voice that sounded very familiar. I instantly thought about the thing I'd heard on the CB radio. I begged her to tell me what I should do. She didn't know. said the old advice was to never answer when it called and never follow when it led, and to never look it in the face. Beyond that, all anyone could do was wait and hope it lost interest, and she didn't know how long that might take. I thanked her and left after that, driving back home, thinking about everything she'd said. I kept working. I had to. But every run I did felt like borrowed time, like a gamble I might not win. I started driving with a partner whenever I could. Another trucker buddy of mine who didn't ask questions when I said I didn't like running solo anymore. And somehow, the thing didn't show up whenever my friend was in the cab with me. But my friend had his own routes and his own life, and he couldn't be there every time. The very last time I saw it was about 6 months after the night in the dust storm. I was running empty back from a delivery alone in the middle of the night. The road was straight and flat, and I was exhausted. I shouldn't have been driving, but I had to get home. I came over this small rise, and I had to hit the brakes hard because there was something in the road. Something standing in my lane on 4 legs, facing my truck, caught fully in the headlights. When I saw its glistening, wet, pale skin, I shuddered. It smiled the same smile I saw before. But then it stepped aside, walking off the road, as if it was letting me through. It stood on the shoulder, even, and it watched me pass as I drove by. I felt like it was telling me something. I didn't speed up and I didn't slow down. I drove normally, and I tried not to scream. That was last year, and I haven't seen it since, but I have had nightmares almost every week. It feels like it's too soon to say that it's gone. I don't want to jinx myself, but I'm so happy and so relieved that I can go back to normal and not live my life looking over my shoulder forever. All I can tell you people who might be listening to or reading this story is be very careful where you drive in the Four Corners region. Beware the roads after dark and where you lay your head on Navajo land. Trucker stories are among my favorite tales to tell. This one was very chilling, and I even got a bit creeped out myself during the dust storm scene. This idea that something that could drag you away to the darkest and secret places of the desert to never be seen again is merely inches away from you through a flimsy semi-truck door. That is something to keep you awake. Good night. Thank you all so much for tuning in to this episode of Tales from the Break Room. I've been your host, Darkness Prevails. You can follow me on X at Dark Prevails. Around this time of year, viewers send me their Spotify Wrapped, and it's so crazy and cool to see so many people who listen to my voice year-round. It reminds me that this show, this channel and podcast, it's nothing without all of you. So thank you. And while I have your ear before I go, for those of you craving a relief from the horror and have a crude, gross sense of humor like I do, and you're an adult, check out my YouTube channel and other podcast, Night Watchers, which you can find on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app. Come hang out, laugh, and have a more lighthearted time. Until next time, everyone, it's time for me to clock out, but I'll be back again real soon.